or potential speakers for upcoming webinars. So if you would like to take a moment, you can use this QR code, which links to a survey, which you can use to give us any input on things you would like to see in upcoming webinars. You can also use the email at the bottom left of the screen to contact us if you ever have any ideas or feedback. We will always appreciate that from you. So specifically, just a little more about our early career subcommittee. As I said, we like to focus global medical physics initiatives to early career researchers. And one of our initiatives is the Global Rising Star program, which is used to showcase global emerging research talents. And two of our speakers today, Tess Reynolds and Grace Gang, are included in this program. So it's a great opportunity. If you're interested, you can use this QR code now to learn a bit more about our early career research network, and you can apply to the Global Rising Stars program if you're interested in participating in any of our webinars or other initiatives. Alongside this program, one of our aims is to expand our global early career researcher network so that we can share news, initiatives, and activities related to early career research to the broader global medical physics audience. So if you have any contacts in your network in the global medical physics community, we're always interested in adding more people to our network and getting our initiatives out there. Part of our initiatives is this webinar series. Just to let you know, we do have more webinars planned as part of this series with the goal of presenting a webinar every few months. Some upcoming topics we currently have planned include how to start a research lab, entrepreneurship, and research landscapes in different global regions. So please keep an eye out for emails from AAPM advertising these webinars. We hope to see you at future webinars. As a reminder to our international audience as well, you do not need to be a member of AAPM to attend these webinars, so please do feel free to share this across your global networks. Finally, we just want to plug that the Global Early Career Research Subcommittee will be hosting a meeting at AAPM in person this year. This will take place on Sunday, July 21st at 7 to 8 p.m. in the Platinum B second floor room. So if you're interested at all in learning more about our subcommittee, our initiatives, and if you want to join us, you're more than welcome to attend if you're available. It would be great to meet you in person. So before we begin our webinar today, I just wanted to briefly talk about the outline. We are going to have each of our speakers give a 20-minute presentation, which will highlight their academic journeys and experience with grant writing, since that's the topic of the webinar today. And following these talks, we will have a panel discussion with our speakers in which they can answer questions from the audience. You can use the Q&A function on Zoom here to ask your questions, but we do ask that you leave all questions till the end. So we will not be answering questions in between the talks. We'll just answer them all at the end of the panel Q&A discussion. So it might be best to just enter your questions at the end of the presentations in case, another speaker answers your question in the meantime. And that's all for introducing. So without further ado, let us begin. We can introduce our first speaker, Dr. Tess Reynolds. I'll let you share your screen, Dr. Reynolds.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And let's get going. So again, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you guys today. And so whilst I am taking this from sort of an Australian point of view, I hopefully that the things I have to say is going to be applicable to everyone applying for grants, no matter what your funding scheme is. So I just thought that, yeah.
I was going to introduce you first.
Oh, sorry, Lauren, I jumped straight in.
Thank you for sharing your screen. But let me just say a few words. Thank you so much, Tess. Tess Reynolds is the Deputy Director of the ImageX Institute, Robinson Fellowship in Cancer Institute, and SW Early Career Fellow at the University of Sydney. Her research is focused on developing new imaging and 3D printed technologies to deliver the future of interventional imaging in challenging surgical scenarios and thoracic radiotherapy. Since 2019, Tess has received a total of $7.9 million in competitive grant funding, including 3 consecutive fellowships. In 2022, she received the Australian Museum Eureka Prize for Outstanding Early Career Researcher, recognizing Australia's top scientist under 35. So as you can see, Tess has a lot of experience in the topic we're talking about today, and the title of her talk is Crikey, Breaking into the Australian Research Funding Landscape. Thank you so much for joining us today, Tess. Please take it away.
Okay, thanks, Lauren. Sorry to have it two starts here. Let's jump in. So I'll just start a little bit about me, aside from everything that Lauren just read out. First things first is I love my job and I love to have fun while I do it. So I definitely hope today is also a bit of fun. I definitely take my job seriously, but I think it's seriously fun to have a laugh while you're doing it. And this is a very stressful job, but it's a very rewarding one. I'm also driven. I love my sport. I love to travel, and that is what drives me to continue to secure grants, to work with people all over the world, and be able to live out my dream through securing all these grants. So these are a couple of the snaps that I've taken over sort of last 2 years since COVID. Being able to tick off a lot of sports items off my bucket list, as well as finding the perfect conference that I encourage everyone to attend if you like winter sports and you love medical physics. The Winter Institute of Medical Physics is the conference for you. I also am an extremely competitive person, which has helped me a long way in my career. I played professional field hockey in Belgium when I was 21, and then I've also represented Australia at 4 World Championships in ice hockey. So I think my background growing up as a professional athlete has really helped me. And so today I'm also going to try and tie in a lot of sports things because I think that there's a big crossover between being an athlete and being successful in research. So I also took a bit of an unconventional journey in terms of how to get into the field of medical physics. So I started my undergraduate at the University of Adelaide, which is my hometown. So this is a beautiful shot of Adelaide, and the university is right here. I started an undergraduate. I actually have 2 degrees in astrophysics. So this is where I started. So I just did a Bachelor of Science. I also did an honours degree, which I don't think a lot of people around the world are familiar with, but it is a whole separate degree and allows you then to go straight into a PhD in Australia after only 1 year. I did take a gap year in between, so I could go play professional field hockey in Belgium. And so that was definitely a first for the university and the physics department to have someone want to take their gap year after already having a degree and a half. I then stayed on and did a PhD in physics, where it was in whispering gallery modes and developing biosensors and with lasers and optics. So I still was trying to find out really where my passion lied. And I must admit, and I'm very open about this, after I finished my PhD, I swore off research and I was like, I'm never doing it again. I took 6 months off, realized that maybe I'm not too good at anything else. And actually research was pretty fun. So then I was fortunate enough to land a postdoc at the University of Sydney with Professor Paul Keel, which hopefully quite a lot of you will be familiar with. So he took a shot at me, which was fantastic because I must admit I didn't know a lot about medical physics and that whole area of physics when I joined. But I then somehow made it all the way up to the deputy director of the institute just under 6 years later, which was very exciting. So I also hold a Robertson Fellowship at the University of Sydney, which is the equivalent to a tenured position. We don't call it tenure in Australia, but it is a continuing position. I also have been fortunate enough to be funded by the Cancer Institute of New South Wales, holding an early career fellowship. I have received close to $8 million in Australian, so I know the dollar's quite bad, but it is still a large amount of money. And been fortunate enough to pick up a number of prizes along the way, which has really helped in securing the grants. So in terms of thinking about, I was trying to think about what in my mind has made me successful in being able to secure grants and how can you do it yourself. So I was really thinking about you have to identify what is the values and what helps motivate you and see if that does align with this highly competitive structure that we find ourselves in the academic world. So for me, I had to do an exercise through the university of sort of identifying this and helping us shape sort of our leadership skills. And so these are the things that I hold as value and motivation. And I think that they do align well in terms of to secure grants, you do have to be doing excellent research. You do need to work hard to deliver on that research. You've got to have that ambition to reach and to apply and look at that future. And then, you've got to find a way to actually secure and win all these grants. So I think, it it is sort of, a lot of people come into science thinking it's very pure, you're just sitting there thinking, solving problems, but unfortunately it is actually very competitive, and you need to be driven, and you need to have that motivation in yourself to continue to pursue and do well. So with that, I was thinking about some of the great coaches that I've had in my sports career growing up. Always were talking about luck and do you have to be good to be lucky and all these things, because there is an element of luck in securing grants as well. But I quickly learned that maybe there isn't anything such as luck, and there's only hard work, and you do have to be good to be lucky. And I think that this reflects in grants in terms of there's a point that there is a big element of luck. There's the old grants are marked by our colleagues, fellow people. There are inherent biases. There's just someone who's reading your proposal before they've had their morning coffee or before they have to go to lunch. And so that can, all it takes is one bad review and you're done. But you need to be good enough in producing solid enough work, writing a strong proposal to then be in that sort of top 10% to then get lucky. So, we'll never deny that there's not an element of luck in securing grants, but you sort of need to have that standard of the quality of the project, the quality of your career to then be in that category of, it's the right time, it's the right score, and you get above the line. So how can we actually, try and overcome this and prepare well enough to get a grant? So I think one of the most important things that I didn't really appreciate early on was actually setting achievable goals. It's not necessarily everyone's favorite thing to do is actually sit down and think about that future. But if you don't know where you're going, you're not going to know the steps to actually the pathway to achieve those goals. So, for myself, I always thought as I needed to first secure funding for me in order to keep, going to get to that next step. Then it's sort of thinking about securing funding for your equipment or for your lab, so hopefully, initially when you start out, you have enough resources around you to make that first step. So, depending on what your goals are, these might be the other way around. And then you want to start thinking bigger and being like, do I then have enough money to support a whole research team to achieve the goals that I want to do? And so again, obviously your goals can be different at a slightly different career stage or exactly where you want to head, but I think the same principles apply. The same thing, I think, especially in Australia, like, the NHMRC, which is the equivalent to the NIH, every grant comes out, there's 160 pages of the rules and regulation, the guidelines for the application. And so it can be very overwhelming to start, especially when you got, sort of just coming out of your PhD, or maybe you haven't quite finished your PhD and you're looking for that next step. So really take the time to understand exactly, what is your landscape? What are all the options? What are they looking for? How do I even write these grants? Ask questions, ask the people around you, and understand that, it's probably not going to happen on the first round. You're building to sort of probably a second or third try at these things. So in Australia, we have a very heavy track record focused funding scheme. So it's much less about the proposal and more about your career. So that has also shaped sort of how I've spent the last sort of 5-6 years setting up my career. Is unfortunately, you really have to be focused on what you're doing, your outputs and stuff. And sadly, it is a little bit less about the actual project. Additionally, you then can also start to look at maybe you don't necessarily need the biggest and brightest, like say, an R01 in the States. There might be smaller grants. So, in Australia, we do have a lot of targeted scheme. So say, for example, I am supported by the Cancer Institute of New South Wales. We have specific grants targeting cardiovascular health and all these sort of substructures that sit under sort of the main big ones. So in terms of you can also, if you have success there, that's going to set you up for sort of securing the larger grants. And they do tend to be a bit more focused on the individual project and less on your track record. So there's always a way, even if you can't secure that massive grant straight away, that you can build up to it. And then I personally, and I've had a lot of success with this, and I try to teach this to my postdocs and my PhD students, is that along the way, so, say, that you've got a funding deadline 12 months out, look at the conferences between then and when the application is due, and provide evidence that your project and you can be successful. So, one that helps build a bit of a track record to show, that you can deliver on projects. There's always opportunities to win prizes at conferences, whether it be a poster award, a presentation award, stuff like that. And at least in Australia, they're very conservative in what they fund in terms of, they say that they want a new idea, but really they just want to sort of have evidence that your idea is going to work. And one of the best ways to do that is to have things like conference proceedings where you go, okay, it hasn't been fully peer reviewed, but at least the society is saying that this is a good idea and this is something that should be, pursued further. Another key thing that I think is really important is sort of your network and where opportunity is going to come for you to find funding or to give you a boost or give you a recommendation letter, things like that. So, you want to make sure that you're showing that you're a good worker, you're a good collaborator, and that you can, network with people and come up with ideas that are bigger than just the research that you can do alone. So, you need to sort of build that team. So that does start, early on as just like your supervisor and mentors around you, but then you can look to actually grow that collaboration network. And so be strategic about these choices because they can really matter. So it's not about being, be true to yourself and true to the people that you want to work with, but make sure that you are aligning with people who have similar visions to you, who do similar work, that are happy to collaborate, and also will look out for you. Especially in that early stage of your career, you want to be able to have people who are in higher up who are going to be able to guide you and give you opportunities. And so again, you can have your different strategies around mentors, sponsors, and collaborators, and they each form different roles in your career, and you can get a lot out of them to help sort of, guide you and support you in any grant preparation or, future strategic thinking. And so in saying that, I do think that teamwork makes the dream work. And so, but that might be something that's a little bit contradictory since, research can often be seen as an individual sport in terms of, for a lot of times, especially for fellowships or individual academic positions, it's just you on the line, you're putting yourself out there, you've got to have that track record individually to stand out and stuff like that. But especially if you want to be successful in growing sort of labs and programs and big project sort of grants, you need the support of your peers and colleagues and your collaborators to get this done. So, and I think that it can also be very powerful that if you build those networks early, that can help you have, future success. I would like to say, hopefully people know this movie reference. There is no crying in baseball, but there definitely is in research. So despite the, success that I have been able to have as an early career researcher, actually maybe now a mid-career researcher, but there are going to be a lot of times where it doesn't go your way and your funding is rejected. I used to keep track of all the rejections and then realize that wasn't probably a great idea. So it then becomes, how do you respond? So hopefully some of you might have seen the Michael Jordan documentary, and I like to I'm not comparing myself to Michael Jordan, but I definitely, I take every rejection personally, but it's how you respond. So to me, it's the drive to prove them wrong, to prove the funders wrong, to prove that, the science that I'm doing is worthy of funding. It's going to help people. It's going to, change the way that we do things in medical imaging. But you have to be resilient. It's definitely not an easy job that we do, and there's going to be a lot of disappointment, but, it's about identifying that next opportunity, preparing yourself so that you're putting your best foot forward every single time, but accepting that there is going to be a lot of disappointment. And it's definitely not an easy thing to do, but there are ways that you can try and build that, both the resiliency and then also to make sure that you are successful, going forward. So I guess just to quickly summarize sort of the key take homes, I think for myself that I found so useful over the past few years is to plan early and plan often. So, hopefully, we're unfortunately in Australia, most of our funding rounds only open once a year. So that does make it a bit more, there's a lot of pressure on to be successful because otherwise you're waiting a minimum of 12 months to go again. So if when it's you have that chance, you have to be prepared and you have to be thinking in the future. By the time the guidelines get published for the next year, that's not when you have to be starting. You have to be starting a long time before. Think about, what you need to build, what's missing in your track record or in the project to make it be successful. You do have to work hard, and I know that might seem like a very obvious thing or almost like a throwaway line, but I think across the world, none of the funding is the amount of money available is expanding, and the amount of people that are joining research, which is fantastic to see so many people be involved. But it just means it's only going to get more and more competitive as that crunch on the available money, remains the same. So I think, you do have to put in the effort. It's not easy. And especially, learning how to write grants can be really difficult. It's not something that we were brought up doing, at least not in sort of undergrad, and even through my PhD, was something that I was a bit naive to, and how important, that would become. And then really put yourself in a position to be successful. So identify people who are going to support you and raise you up, and also challenge you. Again, you don't want just to be surrounded by yes men. You want someone who will keep you grounded and make you strive to be better and all that. But I think the people around you can have a really big influence on your success. And then be you, own your career path. Everyone's career path is going to be different. So it doesn't matter, if you haven't really taken the traditional path. I came from a degree in astrophysics, and here I am today, absolutely in love with the field of medical physics, and couldn't be happier that this is where I've landed. But so there's not a right or wrong career, and unfortunately, a lot of us, we try really hard to change and improve our track record. Sometimes, when that grant is due, you've just got to work with what you've got. So you just accept that and try and find the best things that you can to pull out, to make you stand out in front of the pack. Now I'm a bit conscious of time because I do like to chat, so I think I will end it there, and look forward to answering anyone's questions at the end of the session.
Thank you so much, Tess.
Thank you, Tess. This was amazing. I would like now to introduce our next speaker, Dr. Konrad Nesterik. Dr. Nesterik is an instructor in radiation oncology at Harvard Medical School and a proton therapy physicist in the Department of Radiation Oncology at Mass General Hospital in Boston. He leads and implements upgrades and technology development projects in MGH proton therapy centers. He's also the head of a research lab focused on dose delivery technology R&D for particle therapy. The mission of Dr. Nesterik's lab is to improve the precision and efficiency of dose delivery in particle therapy through technology. The lab is at the intersection of physics and engineering to develop technology that will contribute to better treatment outcomes and improved accessibility of particle therapy. Dr. Nesterik is the PI of a recently funded National Institute of Health Merit Award R37. His project is on compact beam delivery system enabling ultra-fast dose delivery for upright proton therapy, which was funded by the National Cancer Institute. So Dr. Nesterik, if you could share your screen and go ahead, please.
Thank you so much for the introduction and for the opportunity actually to be here and speak at this webinar. So the title of my talk is The Rocky Road to Research Funding, Lessons from an Early Stage Investigator. So let me show you my first and most important slide, probably. So I built this talk around this few topics. These are for me, and then here's a disclaimer. That's what I think winning grants, securing funding is all about. Just a few items that at least helped me to be where I am right now. So hunting for grants is a mindset. That's what I think. You have to develop this mindset. And the earlier you start, the better, because experience is the key. You have to dream big, definitely, to be successful, but be prepared for failure. Be persistent, because it's going to be a long run. Typically doesn't happen with the first try. But I think that's also very important. Never get crazy about one idea. You need to be flexible, listen to feedback, and adjust if needed. And grantsmanship is like entrepreneurship. You like it or not, but there are projects, there are ideas that will basically never be funded, at least at the moment. So you have to observe and adjust to the market if you want to be successful. And last but not least, look for strong and reliable partners. Again, similarity to entrepreneurship. And the team is essential if you want to build something solid. So now I just want to put this few thoughts that I have and things that were always driving me in the context of my journey. So we'll guide you through what happened in my life and refer to these few points. So my first grant application happened when I was 21. It was an undergrad at the University of Warsaw in Poland. So in Poland, typically first you get bachelor's, then master's, and only then you can enter doctoral school. So there was a special grant that was called like Diamond Grant that allowed you to jump from undergrad, so like from bachelor's directly to the doctoral program as it is in some places like in the United States. So that time I was a particle physicist during quantum chromodynamics, and I thought that, okay, I would try. And the result was a failure, not surprising, although not by much. So that was encouraging that actually it is possible, but I was not quite there. But the most important, the first point is checked. I started early. I started gaining experience. Also, I felt for the first time this kind of frustration that you get when you don't get a grant and you try to accommodate it and shape your mindset that I won't still be hunting. So the next one happened when I was in Switzerland. I was doing my postdoc, and at least the landscape in Switzerland is maybe it's a little bit different than in the United States or some other countries. But the typical pathway is that after some postdoc time, you need to still spend some time abroad if you want to come back and become faculty. Without this, it's basically impossible. That's why there are special mechanisms like postdoc mobility. Without mobility, you cannot really achieve anything. So at that time, I planned my career there in Switzerland because I did my PhD there and the first postdoc. And I was thinking, okay, I had my perfect plan. The typical time that is needed before becoming faculty is like 5 years being a trainee, a postdoc after PhD. So I got some years already there, and then I would like to get my international experience. And my dream was to become a postdoc at Mass General Hospital in the group of Dr. Paganetti, is a famous physicist in proton therapy. And that time I was already working in the field of proton therapy, was interested in further career in this field. So I contacted him, but already that time, and this here again, I refer to the mindset. I was not actually asking for any like open position, but that I would like to try to get my fellowship, my funding, and come there. That was for me also very important because I already saw it as something more appealing. Also later in my CV that I secured funding at early stage. So I tried, the result, failure again. And here I just wanted to quickly mention what reviewers said. Okay, one reviewer said that the project is mainly dedicated to the combination and validation of existing software. So there was a limit in originality. And in general, the Research Council has acknowledged that you intend to broaden your horizons with the proposed project. However, some doubts have been expressed as to whether the software development project could be beneficial in terms of future academic career. So that was a little bit surprising, but at least I checked another point. I was dreaming big, but it was a failure. However, I didn't want to give up, so let's try again. I talked to Dr. Paganetti. We looked at the feedback, and we thought what different project could be interesting. So let's try with a different project. And this time it was a success. And here I want to highlight what even the reviewer said. I also like the fact that he took on board advice when his previous application failed and completely rethought and transformed it. This shows an ability to take on board advice and the resilience which is needed in research. And here, I think I checked 2 points. Be persistent because, yeah, it's going to be a long journey, but don't get crazy about one idea. You see that it doesn't work. The criticism was strong enough, saying, that's not good for your career. Then you need to be flexible if you still want to get this particular grant. So that worked for me. And then I went to Boston. I had fantastic time as a research fellow here. But since I was already like hitting this, like my goal of being postdoc for up to 5 years, and so this 2 years in Boston would make up to 2 to 5 years, I started thinking about transition to faculty. And I got an idea for a 5-year research program that could be funded by a European Research Council grant, because that time I still wanted to come back to Europe, to Switzerland. So it's a very competitive program because, of course, many people from all over the world apply to realize this program in one of the universities or research institutions in Europe. But also, and here that's important to stress, it was fun. So you always have to like writing grants, I think, to be successful. So I had a lot of fun during this process because that was the first like very big grant application, right? I was planning something for 5 years, so I was just dreaming. It wasn't only on paper, but on paper I was managing my PhD students, right? I was writing a plan of mentorship. I was managing 1.3 million euros direct costs. Still on paper, but that was really, really fun. And the title was MRI-Guided Adaptive Proton Therapy in the Upright Position for Efficient Treatment of Cancer. And in this grant, so there are 2 steps. One step is, so the first stage is basically, so after the panel discussion, only the best proposals that get grade A are selected to the second stage, which involves interview and so on. So unfortunately, I didn't get to stage 2. So my score was B. So the proposals of high quality, but not sufficient to pass to step 2. And few lessons from here that I learned. So the panel appreciated the project's focus and okay, so the research that I'm proposing is probably still makes sense. There was some concern about the originality of the approach, and clinically wise, a comparative benchmarking with other approaches was lacking. And that criticism was about MRI guidance. So okay, that was an important information. And the last one that also helped me a lot for the future, the quality of the PI was very well appreciated, was noted that, yeah, so on. So like my CV was good enough. And that was important, reassuring that, okay, I'm able to get something. That's so me as a candidate is not a problem, but I need to work more on the project itself. So I decided to be persistent again and try with the same idea, but adjusted to these critiques and the new environment, because this time I decided to try in the United States. So there is this mechanism by NIH, K99/R00. It's also about 5 years, but in this case, the first 2 years are still mentored. It's a mentored phase, and this gives you a pathway to transition to independence. That was also first NIH experience for me, like how it works is quite specific. So yeah, we need to know the landscape right in the country that you plan to apply for grants in the future. The result was well scored. That was already good because more or less half of the grants are not discussed. So I was afraid of that, but it was scored, but the score was not great, so not funded. And here I just put a few messages from the summary statement that I received. So again, great scores for candidates. So I got reassurance that my CV is good enough. And these efforts to optimize proton therapy beam delivery and cost that I proposed, they were considered by most reviewers significant. Again, my feeling was that focus on MRI guidance remained a hard sell. So here came the decision. I need to listen to the feedback and focus on compactness and delivery speed only, and don't get stubborn on this MRI guidance. And here is this grantsmanship is like entrepreneurship, right? It looks like people didn't like my MRI guidance, at least in the form that I was selling it. So maybe it's time to leave it on the side. And in the meantime, I got a faculty position in December 2022. At Mass General Hospital, I'm a proton therapy physicist. As Ibrahim mentioned, I'm working on upgrades, developments in our center, both proton therapy centers, we have two. And I also was appointed instructor in radiation oncology at Harvard Medical School. And this transition got me, or like brought two benefits. First of all, job security, because this position didn't really depend on grants. So I was not on soft money, so to say, right? So I had stable position, but it also gave me eligibility to apply for bigger grants, like this in the US, this R grant. So I would get the support of MGH to apply for bigger grants. So I decided to rethink my project, following what I mentioned before, that the MRI guidance is a hard sell. And I also wanted to add something extra. So I incorporated existing great ideas through the partnership with other people. I focused more on preliminary data from my previous work still as a postdoc in Europe, and also with the work of my partners. And then I assembled really the best team that I could think of for this project, including an industrial partner, since my research is also focused on technology, so that would actually make sense to have some prototypes and so on. So again, here, I can repeat that I didn't get crazy about just one idea that I had initially. I rethought I kept the skeleton, but I rethought what I want to do. And I looked for the strong and reliable partners. So the team, again, is the key. So I was ready to write my first R1 proposal, but that was a very difficult process. First of all, I'm still early stage investigator, so definitely experience plays a role here. And then since I wanted to have this good team, I got two partners, one from Australia, international collaborator, one from industry. And it is not really easy to coordinate, especially as a young researcher. You feel like also probably people don't believe that this application will be successful, right? You have to believe in that. And of course, like ask your partners to provide all the documents and everything. But you really have to get the strategy in your head and chase it. So lots of documents, difficult budget planning, because that was $2.4 million direct costs requested for 3 institutions. So you really have to discuss the budget, adjust for the needs and also like local needs and the equipment that is needed and so on. So that was hard, and I was really running out of time and almost gave up for that funding cycle, thinking that maybe next year. And then comes something interesting, and that's also an important message, that support of other people. We have to be lucky and get the right people around us to be successful. And here I got tremendous support from grants coordinators. One grant coordinator wrote to me, "Hope you're well. I've seen your emails. You want to give up at this point where we are at the finish line? Do not give up. Keep pushing. I believe over the weekend you will get a lot done. Maybe you just need to relax for a while, then come back to it and finish the science. And somehow that was really like a kick of motivation for me. So I worked hard over the weekend. There was also that time one extra day off in the US. So I worked until 3 a.m. and I got it done. But here, really, I'm stressing this, that we have these people around, or you have these people around you in the institution you work at, this grants administrator, they are there to help and support you. Sometimes they can support you by sending a nice email, but of course they're also supporting you with other difficulties. And the outcome was incredible. I couldn't believe in that, because it was my first application, this big project. For people who don't know NIH scoring system, 10 is the perfect score, 90 is the worst. So 23 impact score is really very good. And even more important, that percentile is 6. So it means that it's in top 6% of best applications. So basically that I was already sure that it would be funded, because it's higher than any historical pay line. And another important thing, if you are within 10 years of your terminal degree, in my case, PhD, and you didn't have before a big grant like R1, you are eligible for early stage investigator. That gives you two things. One is that the pay line is slightly higher, so I was even more certain that that would fly. But another great thing that happened is that it was upgraded to R37 Merit Award, which NCI at least is giving to early stage investigators that submitted the most meritorious projects. And that gives 2 additional years over normal 5 years of R1 with extra budget. So that's fantastic. I secured funding for 7 years thanks to that. And well, what are my next steps now? Promotion to assistant professor is pending. I will keep trying to secure more grants and keep this mindset that I was talking about, to mostly make my research lab grow, of course, and realize my dreams. And the take-home message is the first slide. Again, I can only reiterate that the earlier you start, the better. Dream big, but be prepared for failure. Be persistent, but don't get really crazy about one single idea. Observe the market, adjust to it, and build a strong and reliable team. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. Nostrik, and thanks for sharing some examples from the reviews that you got. These are very helpful. Turn now to Lauren to introduce the next speaker.
Yes. Thank you so much. Our next speaker is Dr. Grace Gang. You can start to share your screen while I introduce you if you'd like, Grace. Dr. Grace Gang is an assistant professor in the Department of Radiology at the University of Pennsylvania. She received her Bachelor of Applied Science and PhD in Biomedical Engineering from the University of Toronto. Her research spans a wide range of topics from X-ray detector physics, analytical and model-based image reconstruction, system modeling and optimization, to human visual perception. Dr. Gang has developed a strong research program and has been the recipient of numerous awards, most notably first place in the Johns R. Cameron Young Investigator Symposium in 2013, the AAPM Research Seed Grant Funding in 2014, the Jack Fowler Jr. Investigator Award in 2018, and the John S. Laughlin Early Career Scientist Award in 2022. Dr. Gang's current research interests include the development and performance analysis of deep learning algorithms, standardization of radiomics features using knowledge of imaging physics, and the development of spectral imaging techniques for interventional applications. She currently serves as the principal investigator of 3 R1 grants from the NIH. The title of her talk today is Persistence is Key, My Experiences with NIH Grant Applications.
Thank you so much, Lauren, for the introduction. So let's just jump right into it. So this is my disclosure. Most of my effort is supported by NIH grants. I also have an academic industry research partnership with Siemens Healthcare. I want to start by briefly introduce my research background, research experience. I spend a lot of my time in my PhD developing mathematical models for the imaging chain in CT and chromium CT systems. So these are kind of something called cascaded systems analysis and modeling how signal and noise propagate through each of the physics stages and mathematical stages, the image formation for CT and chromium CT. So if you tell me, I'm imaging at this energy, at this dose level, using this detector reconstruction kernel, I can tell you what's the noise and resolution that's in the final reconstruction. I also done a lot of work with task-based image quality evaluation and optimization. So combining the physical measure of image quality of noise and resolution with models of the imaging task and models of the observer, we can then develop mathematical models to predict how humans can perform certain imaging tasks. For example, what is the area under curve of an ROC when the clinician is trying to detect a lesion in chest radiographs, for example. And in my postdoc and follow-up training, I've expanded my area of expertise quite a bit. I've developed a lot of interest in algorithm development, so including CT reconstruction, material decomposition, and spectral CT, including both model-based approach and emerging deep learning algorithm. If I can insert a shameless self-plug, this figure is a deep learning algorithm we recently developed for joint motion estimation and material decomposition for spectral digital subtraction angiography, and this will be presented in AAPM next week. So most of my work has been fairly theoretical. I did have the pleasure of working a little bit with hardware development. So this is a project in collaboration with Philips, where we're developing a dynamic fluence modulation device. So as you may know, CT have a static bow tie in the system to reduce dose to kind of the peripheral region of the patient. But as the gantry rotates around, a static filter is not really enough to compensate for the changing cross sections. So the idea is to make something that's dynamic that can accommodate the changing cross section as the gantry rotates around. So I was involved in the design and correction algorithm for such a device. This video shows the device in action on the actual CT gantry, and it's moving at a speed that's consistent with the half-second rotation speed on a CT gantry. So more recently, I have expanded my research into radiomics as well. So there are a lot of research interest in using radiomics to develop models to predict diagnosis, patient prognosis, et cetera. But one of the major challenges is that images acquired from different scanners, reconstructed using different algorithms, have distinct noise and resolution properties. And this presents undesirable variations in radiomics values that would decrease the robustness and reproducibility of radiomics model. And the current standardization approach relies on kind of statistical approach that doesn't really take into account the full knowledge of imaging physics. And since I have spent a lot of time developing models for imaging physics, I think this is a perfect opportunity to combine computer science approach and imaging physics in radiomics standardization. So this is kind of recent work that I'll talk a little bit more about. So this is my academic journey. It's a pretty typical academic career path. So I obtained my bachelor and PhD at University of Toronto in biomedical engineering. I did a postdoc at Johns Hopkins University and then kind of slowly climb up the academic rank to research associate and then to assistant professor in the research track in the Department of Biomedical Engineering. And during this time is when I started really applying for grants. I was lucky to secure a couple of NIH funding, so I think it's time for me to transition to a tenure track position. So a couple of different opportunities came up. Eventually, I decided to move to the University of Pennsylvania in radiology. And this is my fledgling lab that's 2 years old. I thought long and hard and found I think a good name for my lab. It's called Impact Lab, standing for Laboratory for Imaging Physics, Analysis, and Clinical Translation. I have 2 PhD students and 3 postdocs right now. So we're here to talk about grant application, and I've put together kind of my grant portfolio focusing on the ones I'm PI or NPI of. So I was lucky to secure kind of 3 R01s in my early career. In addition to kind of being on the investigator side of things, I also serve on the study section, which is kind of a review committee for NIH grants. So I was invited to be an ad hoc member on imaging technology development, ITD study section. Also an ad hoc member on the clinical translational imaging science, or CTIS study section. I was recently invited to be a standing member on CTIS, and my appointment will start from October of this year, and it's a 4-year appointment. Just as a disclaimer, so everything in this presentation is my personal opinion. It doesn't reflect the opinion of the NIH or HHS or the United States government. So I thought it would be of interest to share kind of my timeline preparation leading up to the bigger NIH R1 grants. So the first one I want to talk about is on kind of image quality assessment for deep learning. So this is back in 2018, which, you know, it's definitely further back than I thought. So this is when deep learning algorithms are just starting to emerge. And because I've done a lot of image quality assessment for kind of traditional and model-based reconstruction algorithm, and the kind of tools we know and love, like modulation transfer function with power spectrum, is no longer applicable to deep learning algorithm. And I haven't seen this topic receiving a lot of attention in conferences yet. So this is an opportunity for me to come up with some sort of analysis framework for this new class of reconstruction algorithm. So I started with an R21 application. It's not discussed. And so I didn't stop there, of course. In the middle, I also kind of found a lot of internal grant application or society foundation opportunities, and I just kind of went all out. So for this particular topic, there is an internal Johns Hopkins award called the Discovery Award. It's a very small application, I think 3 pages. I went for that as well, and it did not get funded either. So instead of backing off, I decided to double down, because one of the comments I got from R21, actually 2 of the comments I got from the R21 application, is that this is too ambitious for a 2-year, 3-year project. So I made it bigger and then submitted an R1 application. So I was very happy to see the percentile was 19, so it was #1 discussed, and it's a pretty good percentage. The comments, the feedback are also addressable. So between the resubmission, I also went for another foundation opportunity. This is something called the Lowenstein Foundation, also kind of a 1-pager that is kind of a letter of intent that has to go through Hopkins first before it moves to the actual application. So I submitted a 1-pager, internally reviewed by Hopkins, didn't move forward. So I resubmitted the R1 in the next cycle, and the percentile is 13. So NCI has a notoriously low pay line. So I think the pay line in that year was 8%. But I was very lucky. I'm a new investigator and an early stage investigator, just like Conrad. So my pay line was kind of bumped up to 13%. So it's just right on the line, and I got the grant. Very happy. And then the following year, January is the official project start date. So the second grant is on hybrid spectral CT. So this is actually an idea that's brought to me by a colleague, Peter Noel, so who's also currently my neighbor at the University of Pennsylvania. So the idea is, you know, every major CT vendor has their own flavor of spectral CT. So, you know, Philips has your dual layer detector, Siemens has the dual source, and GE have KB switching. But we want to think about what's the next generation of spectral CT. And in fact, what's fast compared to all these different piecewise spectral technology is a combination or hybrid of spectral CT technology. This would improve spectral separability and improve sensitivity to iodine contrast agents, which would be important for, you know, applications like oncological therapy assessment. So we started working together on this grant. We first didn't go for NIH right away. We actually started with American Cancer Society. So we submitted grants, first round, not funded. And then the NIH deadline came around. We converted that into an R01 submission. the percentile is 40%. So it's discussed, which is good for, it's kind of my goal for a first round submission. I kind of want it to be discussed and get some feedback. So the comments were addressable still, so we know that we want to do a resubmission. In between, the second round of ACS came around, submitted, not funded again, and then we submitted the NIH R01, and this time we got a percentile of 15. I believe the pay line at the time was 16, so also pretty lucky, kind of right on the line. So the ACS allows 3 rounds of application, and we thought, you know, let's just give it a shot. So we submitted third round for ACS, still not funded, but because we have this R1 funded, so we decided, you know, let's just give up on the ACS application. So that's the second one. So the third one is kind of on the radiomic standardization project I talked a little bit earlier about. And this really just started with an idea. I saw a need for incorporating imaging physics in the radiomic standardization process. At the time, I didn't really know if it was a good idea or if how it's going to work yet. But then, you know, there are a couple of foundation opportunities that I think would be a good fit for lung imaging. So I just submitted a couple of those. So starting with this Parker B. Francis Fellowship Program, not funded. Also, American Lung Association has a Discovery Award. So this is also the same kind of deal. You do kind of a letter of intent to be reviewed internally by Johns Hopkins, and then you can go for the real application. So for this one, the letter of intent passed the JHU nomination process, but eventually was not funded. So from the conception of the idea, and while I was working on these small grants, I was kind of refining the methods, developing methods on how to actually do this and generating preliminary results. So in June of 2020, I submitted this NIH R01 grant. First round, not discussed. The summary statement was very interesting. So the main problem is the reviewers just didn't really understand what we're trying to propose. Comments were like, oh, this approach is not going to work, but we're actually proposing, you know, the opposite approach. So it's our fault for not explaining this properly. So we did a resubmission addressing all the comments. Oh, another thing I should mention is there is an additional mechanism to submit the supplementary page. I believe this is a mechanism that only came around after COVID. So a month before the study section, you can submit 1 additional page of supplementary material. So this is an opportunity for you to tell the reviewers, oh, I did this, improved my preliminary results, or I make more progress on this project. So kind of additional space for you to make your case. So I submitted this supplementary page, and the second round percentile is 12. So that's enough to get under the pay line, which was either 16 or 14% at the time for NIVIB. So that's kind of the timeline and process that led up to the 3 major R01 grants. I also want to talk a little bit about the review process. I think this is pretty fascinating to me the first time I served on the study section, and hopefully it'll be helpful for kind of early stage investigators as well. So as you may know, there are 5 score driving categories: significance, innovation, approach, investigator, and environment. I won't go into each category, but this link here, if you search for NIH application guides, actually contains a pretty thorough write-up on what each category is, and you should focus on each category. I actually didn't know about this when I was reading my grants. I only knew about this link when I was searching for materials for this talk. However, after 2025, I think the score driving categories will be reduced to just 3, such as significance, innovation, and approach. So investigator and environment is gone from the score driving categories. We shall see how this affects the score. I think the motivation is to kind of increase equity and reduce biases in the review process. So in terms of the actual review process, so each grant is assigned 3 reviewers, and the reviewers will give score for each of these score driving categories. from 1 to 9, with 1 being the best. In addition to that, they were also given overall impact score. And the overall impact score is not an average of the category scores. So the category scores is only given sort of as a guideline. And during the actual study section, each grant gets about 15 minutes for discussion. So reviewer 1 to 3 will present their opinion in order. So reviewer number 1 typically takes the most time, maybe around 5 minutes. And then reviewer number 2, about 3 minutes. Number 3, about 2 minutes, roughly. Then the grant is open for discussions. So everyone in the study session can ask questions and the reviewers can answer their questions. Then the chair will provide a summary of the discussion and the reviewers and the panel's opinions. And then they'll ask for, he or she will ask for a final impact score from the 3 reviewers. And this is an opportunity for the reviewers to adjust their impact score. So they can be convinced or by other reviewers to change their score one way or the other, or they can maintain their original impact score. And the range of the impact score will set the voting range for everybody else on the study section. So the last stage, everyone on the study section will vote within this range. There is an opportunity to vote outside of the range, so you have to raise your hand and say, oh, I want to vote outside the range, and you can do so. So at the end of the day, for each applicant, they will get a summary statement. So if it's not discussed, that means the score is kind of below is in the bottom 50%. So in this case, you just get 3 critiques. If it's discussed, meaning it's in the top 50%, you will get a summary of the discussion in addition to the 3 critiques. And you also get your impact score and also the percentile. And this percentile, as we talked about before, is what it's going to decide whether your grant gets funded or not for R01s. I believe for R21s, there is a little bit of trickiness. It's not just you have to pass a certain pay line. I think it depends on the type of R01, but R21. But I think the program officer has more say over which R21 gets funded. So I will share my experiences and what I've learned during the grant preparation process. But full disclosure, I don't know. I know how to actually secure grants, but hopefully these tips will help you to increase the probability of getting grants. So I think the first lesson is learn by example. So I certainly didn't have any exposure to grant writing during my postdoc or PhD training. And grant writing is very different from paper writing, right? So I'm an engineer. When I'm writing a paper, I like to dive right into the gory details of the algorithm and prove it works under all these different conditions. But for grant, we need to kind of focus on the bigger picture. We're trying to plan out a 4-year or even a 5-year study. But we still need to provide sufficient details to convince people that you know what you're doing and your hypothesis and your approach is rooted in scientific evidence, it's rigorous, and has a high chance of success, right? So in addition, different agencies and different funding opportunities also have different formats and different requirements. So being able to see a successful example is really, really helpful. Second, as an early career professional, it's really important to have a supportive environment. So I started applying grants when I was a research associate and a research faculty. So this type of position in my institution is 100% supported by the grants from a senior person. So this naturally takes my time away from doing the actual, the senior person's grant that's actually funding me. So you need to make sure that you're in an environment where the person who's supporting you is okay with you devoting this much time to write grants. Also, you need to make sure before you write a grant that you can serve as the PI of this grant. For some grants, I think postdocs can also serve as the PI. So make sure that before you devote the effort, you are in a position where you can write the grants and then you can actually take credit for the grant. And in my personal opinion, the most important factor of getting a grant is to have a good idea. You need to have an idea that can excite the reviewers. You're going to see in summary statement language like oh, the enthusiasm for this project is high, or this weakness reduces the enthusiasm of this project. So it's a little subjective, and it depends on kind of how much weight the reviewer place in each category. But doing a good job in communicating the impact, the significance, the innovation, having strong preliminary results. These are all factors that can help to make this proposal more exciting for the reviewer. Another factor, I think, emphasized by both Karen and Tess is build a good team. Especially for R1 grants, these are big grants, multi-year grants, and it's hard for any one person to have all the expertise to do everything. So you need to have a good team with complementary expertise to be able to carry out this project. And one thing the reviewer will look for is whether you have evidence of past collaborations and publications. So if you want to find someone from across the globe to collaborate on a grant, maybe it's time to start having some joint publications together. So in terms of how to communicate the grant, communicate the idea, the advice that I got a lot is, tell a story. Why is this research important? Why is it necessary? Why is what you're supposing going to work? But you also can't actually do the thing you're proposing, right? Then the reviewer will say, oh, you've already done it, so what are you going to use this money for? So there's a lot of subtleties. And because we're applying for NIH application, the NIH core mission is to improve healthcare. I've always tied my grant to a clinical application, although the importance of clinical application, I believe, also depends on kind of the institute and the study section as well. So, and this is something, I still need a lot of help from my clinical partners on how to identify a good clinical application, a compelling clinical application. And it's also important when you're writing to make it easy for the reviewers. There are certain things the reviewers are looking for. So really make it obvious. For example, scientific premise, rigor prior research. All the evaluations need to be backed up with solid statistical methods, and you need a biostatistician on the team to fulfill that role. So all these things, it would be nice for the proposal to have obvious places where the reviewer don't have to, read between the lines. So the easier you make it for a reviewer, the better. And one of the first pieces of advice I got when I started running grants is don't get emotionally attached. So this is kind of a random process. Like I said, we can do things to increase the probability of getting the grant, but there's still a lot of uncertain factors. It depends on which reviewer you're going to get, depending on how heavily this reviewer weighs each scoring category. The outcome may be very different. And a common theme from the talk today, and when you talk to any investigators, is that there are a lot of failures before you can be successful. So don't get too emotionally attached, and don't be crushed when something is not funded. And when you get a critique, take a deep breath. I think I'll be lying if I say I've never been frustrated by the critiques I got. Sometimes I get comments like, oh, they didn't just discuss this, but I did. It's in bold letters, it's in a separate paragraph. Why didn't you see it, right? But this happens a lot, but I would say have an attitude where you see this as an opportunity to improve the clarity of your communication. If they didn't see it, maybe repeat it in critical places so that it can't miss it the next time. Say in a way that's more easily understood. If they're not convinced your method is not going to work, improve your preliminary results. For one of these grants where the reviewer wasn't convinced my method is going to work, we actually had a peer review publication between the submission and the resubmission. So in the resub, in the introduction page, I said, well, okay, we have a peer-reviewed publication now proving that our method is going to work. And I think, ultimately that's helpful as well. So before I end, I want to introduce this early career reviewer program by the NIH. So this is a program for people who may not have their own grants already, especially for early career investigators, to have the opportunity to sit on a study section. And I believe you can get a lighter load for grant review. It's really interesting and really helpful to be on the other side of things and see how the review process actually works and read different people's grants, see how they present things, and in discussion what the reviewers care about, what the reviewers don't care about. So if you're eligible, if you have the time and bandwidth, I think this is a great program to participate in. Yeah, so I think I'll stop here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you so much. That was great.
Awesome, thank you. I'll now introduce Dr. Martin Fast, who's our fourth speaker. Dr. Fast studied physics at the University of Heidelberg in Germany, and then he did his PhD at the German Cancer Research Center. After postdoc appointments at the Institute of Cancer Research, Royal Marsden Hospital in London, and the Netherlands Cancer Institute, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek Hospital in Amsterdam, Dr. Fast was appointed as associate professor in the radiotherapy department at University Medical Center in Utrecht in 2019. Dr. Fast's research interest is in the development of MRI-guided real-time adaptive radiotherapy. He's currently the co-author of more than 50 peer-reviewed publications, and he has received grants with more than 5 million euros in competitive grant funding. Dr. Fast leads the joint EFOMP/AAPM TG 391 on the use of 4D MRI in radiotherapy. Dr. Fast, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the kind introduction. I hope you can see my slides and hear me. It was a very impressive lineup of speakers, so a tough act to follow, but I will try to fill in a little bit of the European perspective. And I do realize that for some, or maybe even most of you, that's not directly applicable, but hopefully we can still identify some areas of overlap and some common themes. So allow me a single slide just on the research topic that I work on, just a very big picture overview. In Utrecht in the Netherlands, more than 20 years ago, people, and this was obviously before my time, started to fantasize, dream about a hybrid radiotherapy MRI machine, about an MR-Linac. This was a little bit ahead of the time or their time. So it took over 20 years to enter into clinic, but it is a really successful journey overall, and it was my pleasure to be part of that in the last roughly 10 years. And I focus now on continuous developments of this system, adapting treatments in real time to the physiological processes that occur during treatment. So this is an interesting slide for me because that's the slide that during conference presentations, basically you skip over in 27 milliseconds. But it is interesting because it does show the funding agencies that support me. And here in the Netherlands, that's especially the Dutch Research Council, a national taxpayer-funded government agency. I think similar to comparable agencies in the US. And then we also have the European funding layer, so European Union-based research funding, which is quite important. And additionally, because my work is very practical in a sense, so it's very close to the medical devices which are in the market, there's also a lot of opportunities to collaborate with industrial partners. So this is my slide now, but this seminar gave me an opportunity to actually look back, which is something I seldom do as a researcher. Of course, I look forward, but it's actually nice to think about how I got here. And if I take the same slide 5 years ago, then it suddenly looks something like this. This is a pretty empty acknowledgement slide, but on this day 5 years ago, I did not have any grant funding to speak of, or industrial partners, or anything like that. So how did it come to this? I started my my kind of journey in the medical physics field, and especially in radiotherapy, with my PhD. So I completed this in 2013 in Heidelberg in Germany. It's a beautiful town. It was a very enjoyable PhD period, but I was not writing grant applications. In fact, I wasn't even aware really that grant applications was a thing to do. So I definitely did not send in my first grant at 14 or 21 or even 25. I was lucky to have a professor who took care of these things, and I could do the research, experimentation, write the papers, go to the conference, all the fun things that attract people to research. So after this PhD, I moved institutes and also moved countries. I went to London for a few years to start my first postdoc position. And again, during this period, I was very focused on experimental research. I was focused on scientific output, student supervision as well. I was not focused on writing grant applications. Actually, I did not write a single grant application or even considered writing a grant application in this period. So in hindsight, I think that seems a little bit old-fashioned, perhaps. So it's something that nowadays I would not recommend to my own postdocs, but it's just to show that it's not always that you have to write your first grant during your first year as a PhD student or your first year as a postdoc. You can also take your time and first develop your research expertise. So next stop for me was going back to continental Europe, moving to Amsterdam. In Europe, this was also a really well-renowned institute. I had gotten to know these people at conferences. They had an interesting project for me, and I decided to start there in 2017. And after about a year, the topic of grant applications suddenly became relevant to me. And it was not so much that I had to write a grant suddenly. It was more the realization that if I don't, then I will probably kind of have to hop from 1 or 2 year project to 1 or 2 year project without being able to really set my own research agenda. So I was suddenly getting interested in grant writing, and I was seeing it as an opportunity to basically exclusively focus on my own research ideas. So this is now the period where I wrote my first grant application, and my second, and then my third application, and finally with the third application, I managed to actually get the funding, and this funding was a fellowship type of grant, so it gave me a lot of freedom, and it also gave me the flexibility to basically pick and choose the institute that would best suit my research agenda. So it was not funding that was bound to a specific institution. It was funding that was bound to me as a person. So with this funding, I went to Utrecht. So the birthplace of Emma Linnock, and started as associate professor now in a tenured position. So in preparation for this presentation, I was looking a little bit back in my old folders. How many grants did I actually apply for? So I counted 14. So it's a little bit of a sample size, I think, to make or draw conclusions from. So out of 14, that's of course what you want to have. There were 5 successful applications. That's what everyone posts on LinkedIn, and that's what you see on your institutional website. But of course, it also means that there were some failed applications, and then there's also, of course, always some pending applications. So where does it lead? It leads to a kind of career success rate of 1 in 3, which yeah, I'm not sure if it's good or bad, but I just know that the 2 out of 3 times when it doesn't work, it's always painful. And unlike one of the previous speakers, I definitely always take it personal. So I think I just learned to also allow myself to be angry at that moment. And that just helps me to basically dissipate the negative energy, and then I can get back to it after a while and look at it constructively at the feedback and try again if I think it's still worth it. So if you split it into type of grants, for me, actually, fellowship grants were the toughest category. So globally, if you look at fellowship grants in the Netherlands, you have a 1 in 10 success chance. For me, it was 1 in 6, but it felt incredibly difficult to get into this fellowship track. As I said a couple of minutes ago, the first 2 fellowship applications, they were also just not successful. Also I didn't receive really feedback that was very helpful to me at that moment. So I had to just scrap the applications and start fresh. And then on the 3rd attempt, it was successful, but it is quite tough. And this should not be underestimated. Equipment grants were kind of okay, 50-50. I managed to be very successful with public-private partnership grants. So grants involving industry contributions, and not just we give you a piece of software or we give you a phantom, but actually also cash investments. I think it helps also the funding agency to see that there is a third party which is willing to actually put money on the table. That's kind of an endorsement which is quite strong. So with this type of category in my specific line of work, I managed to be quite successful so far. There was one kind of European consortium which is quite large and was granted, and also others. So that's sort of the split up into the different types of grants that I try to apply for, to pending. So one piece of advice, and you have to take it, of course, with a grain of salt because it's only my personal experience, but one piece of advice from me would be to try and take the perspective of the grant reviewer. In the last 2 or 3 years, also had the opportunity to review some grants, so to be on the other side of the table. And you really, as someone who submits the grant, should not underestimate how little time your grant reviewers have for your applications. So it's not that they don't want to, but they get a big pile of applications, and they just have also their own work to do. So first impressions really count, and try to see it from that point of view, step into their shoes. And I think this is another small piece of advice. I think when you draft your application, you should ask yourself a few questions concerning relevance. Well, of course, is it relevant to society, to the field, to all kinds of stakeholders? That should have a positive answer. Is it interesting? I mean, it could be relevant, but extremely straightforward and boring. But here you also need to have a positive answer. And even if you have positive answers with the first two, you still need to navigate this tricky so what question. So just to give you an example from my line of work, I mean, I could write a grant application suggesting to build an MR-Linac, but not with 1.5 Tesla. Let's build it with 14 Tesla, right? I mean, it's relevant, right? Because with 14 Tesla, you get beautiful brain images, extremely high resolution. It is interesting. It's extremely challenging. I wouldn't even know how to combine the technologies. But of course, just because I had two positive answers there, you would still get thrown out at the so what stage. So this would not be a plausible proposal at this point. So try to answer these questions yourself convincingly. Otherwise, the grant reviewers will do this for you, and you might not like the answers. So if you pass this relevant step for yourself, you still need to think about whether they will actually trust you to do what you promise. So is the work plan plausible? Work plan sounds very technical. I think people don't spend enough time on it. But for an expert reviewer, they can get caught up in a work plan that is not plausible very easily. That's can be a number one reason of rejecting an application. So assuming you have a plausible work plan, it's the question if the applicant can actually do it. So it needs to be connected, I think, with your areas of expertise and with your demonstrated areas of expertise. That's quite simple, but yet fundamental in the decision making. And lastly, I wanted to highlight here that there needs to be benefits that come out of your project that go beyond you as an investigator and your immediate surrounding. So I think with medical physics or radiotherapy, as an example, we can create a good dissemination plan, because ultimately there are patients that are benefiting, but we have to make this, I think, quite explicit for the grant reviewer. So then I want to present my own red wine rule of grant applications. So I try to make the analogy here of a good red wine and a grant application. So it just takes time to get right. You need to allow yourself this time. There's little kind of really hard evidence I can give you, but any application that was still under construction a week before the deadline ultimately failed. So I try to have this finished at least 2 weeks beforehand, and then I want to let it simmer. I just want to not look at it for a few days. Of course, I'm churning through it in my brain, but I need this time to have everything settle down and to reconsider it. Second part of this is that quality to me beats quantity. So statistically, we all probably have a 1 in 10 chance to get a grant. That doesn't mean we should churn out 10 applications per year. We should try to win on quality. And I think fewer applications is better because it allows you more time per application. And that time you can invest in quality. What I just said, so part of taking time is just letting it sit and breathe a little bit, just I think the kind of, we have this active writing process, but we also have this passive churning through the application while we go running or whatever we do. And then that's very important. It helps you refine your application. And then I think we should always, even if it's your personal own fellowship, we should always write these grants or develop these grants as a team. So I personally have not really made any good experiences with trying to do this process on my own. You just need this. If anything, you need this independent feedback on your own thoughts. So coming back to first impression counts, I think with grant applications, it's a lot of text. So it's not just the main idea in 200 words. You have to really drag it out over many, many subsections and subsections. And of course, the reviewers can read this and should, but they also need something quick and easy that helps them to digest your idea. So for me, I try to do this in a graphical way. If that's permitted in wherever you're applying, then make use of it. They have to, the reviewers have to be able to understand what you're doing in 2 minutes. That's my kind of rule of thumb. Not in detail, not exactly how you do it, and if you're really the right person, but at least they have to understand what you're doing. So make use of some graphs. Simple graphs. This is an example from my field where this makes sense. For other people, this might be confusing, but I think for the reviewers in my subfield, this was easy to take in. So just to summarize, and actually also add 1 or 2 new items, a couple of rules of thumb. I would start personally by building a good reputation as a researcher before you even consider writing a grant. This can take many years. I think you shouldn't rush it at this stage. It's okay to work on someone else's grant and develop your own ideas on the side. That's not a problem, I would say. Then practically, and I made this mistake a few times, especially with larger grant schemes, do read the funding call before you start writing. I have done this sometimes, and it has helped me a lot. Sometimes I haven't, and that just means you have to rewrite over and over again, and that's annoying. It's unnecessary, unforced error. I think you should pick and choose. This is maybe a little bit different than previous advice you have heard here, but I think you should actually skip most funding calls and just focus on the ones that make sense for you. So I've made bad experiences with trying to kind of reshape what I really wanted to do to fit the funding call. So develop your idea and then find the funding call that works with this idea is what I would suggest. As also said before, it is really helpful to see past applications. So of course you can easily write your main idea and maybe even your research plan, but there's so many other sections that you need to fill in. It just gives you a few ideas when you see what other people have done, and don't copy it. So just digest it and then create your own version. And don't just look at the successful ones. I mean, I think you can learn just as much from the failed ones because of this randomness of the decision process. So there's as much good stuff in failed applications as there is in successful ones. And then I think this is a point which is really important to me, similar like the selection of the funding scheme. Write the application you want to write. And sometimes we get in this mode where we try to anticipate what the reviewers want to see, and then we try to change everything so that it sounds good for the reviewers. This is not what you should do. It's not going to work. Even if it's going to work, you will be stuck with the project which you don't want to do. So don't do it. And for me, I try to spend most of my time on the for me core bits of the application, which is the work plan. So you have these committee reviewers that are quite top level. They have to understand the relevance and things like that. But then you also have the expert reviewers who go into your work plan, and it has to be plausible, right? It has to work. And if you get the money, yeah, then you better have a work plan that is realistic and don't overpromise there things that you can't deliver. And I think another aspect that's not so important maybe for the very first grant, but later on, think about the personnel that you can realistically expect to hire. So you also have to have a work plan where the people that you can attract actually can function in that environment. So yeah, tailor it a little bit to people that you maybe already have that you want to find funding for, or people that you would like to attract and can attract into your research group. This is maybe a little bit controversial, but I think this everything with AI gets funding window has closed. So there was a maybe 1 or 2 year window when this was yeah, you could just throw in any application as long as you had AI in there. You didn't really know what you were writing. The reviewers didn't know what it was. So, but it sounded cool. I think this is over. So don't force AI where it's not really plausible. Use it by all means if it's plausible, but don't just add it to an application which really didn't have AI in it, but you just think you have to add it because otherwise you never get funding. I think that period is over. And AI is a recent example, but there's other kind of hot technologies that at various points people feel like they have to include, but always be a little bit critical, I think, if it's really necessary. Coming back to the red wine rule as a summary, as a repeat, take your time, don't rush it. Don't go for quantity, go for quality. Teamwork is important, especially in the brainstorming phase. So in the lead up to a grant application, I try to have a weekly meeting with all the stakeholders, and then over a period of multiple months. And that helps you to basically evolve your idea, improve it. Don't necessarily expect others to do the writing for you. I think you might be disappointed, but instead focus on the important input that they can give you, which is the ideas and the bigger picture. I think it's very good if you're in an applied setting to involve industry. I said this before. It will also make it easier for your innovations to ultimately benefit, for example, patients. So I think this will make for a good dissemination strategy. And once you have the grant, also to have, that's my last slide, to have a couple of points here. Once you actually got the grant, it's not over. In many ways, it only starts. So focus on the execution of your research project. So don't immediately jump onto the next grant, I would say. Just get it right, get your work plan right, do good research. So, and while you do this, you have to really respect your funding agencies. I mean, they entrust you with a lot of money, taxpayer money, charity money, industry money, whatever money. They want to have a warm, fuzzy feeling about it, right? So you have to build a positive reputation with them to then make it also a bit easier for yourself with the subsequent applications. I would say don't overreach. So yeah, you just got a grant. It's amazing. Maybe the next week following that, you don't have to actually submit already your next application. So find pace of growth for your research group that suits you. So for me personally, I try to have certain frequencies. So for example, for these kind of 1 million plus fairly large 5-year grants, I try to, if possible, acquire those every 2 years, because that means that not too many of them are running at the same time. So there's always a little bit of overlap, but it's not suddenly 4 of them, and managerially it would be a nightmare. And then with the larger network grants, it's not a personal grant, so usually I'm a small part of them, so it's not as much work, but the funding rates are quite low, so it's good to do this yearly, and then hopefully every few years one of them will get through. Okay, that was all from my end. So thank you for your attention, and thanks again for the invitation.
Thank you, Dr. Fast, and thanks for all the speakers for these wonderful tips. Thanks also for the audience who stayed around for the 4 talks, and I think we're gonna open it up now for Q&A, right, Lauren?
Yes, so please use the Q&A function to ask any questions. We can get started in the meantime, but yeah, feel free to ask any questions to all our speakers or an individual speaker, just make that clear. I think to start off, this was maybe alluded to a little bit, but I was wondering if you could all maybe elaborate on what kind of grants to focus on in very early career, maybe for somebody's first grant. I know like the K99, for example, was alluded to. I forget who was talking about it a little bit, but maybe any other not R01, first grants that people should aim for in your experience.
So I mean, the AAPM grant actually was my first grant, and I think that's open to postdocs and residents. So it's a 4-pager. It's a small scale. It's nice to get your feet wet. Yeah, I have 0 success with anything other than ROIs. So maybe I'll leave this to others.
Yeah, I think that also depends really on the stage of your career, right? So, like I also showed so I was probably the one that also mentioned K99 because I applied for that. With that time, I just wanted to transition to faculty, and that looked like a good opportunity, this mechanism. But also before I applied for this fellowship to go somewhere to the place I wanted, but being already the PI of my project. So I would say that you have, well, depends. So here we have people from Europe, right? Like Martin, we have people from Australia, like Tess. So it depends on the landscape, of course. If we're talking purely about the US, there are some, I think there's American Cancer Society, there are some like fellowship-like grants. There is K99 that is definitely nice and prestigious grant, but difficult to get. So depends, but there might be some other fellowships that are worth to apply to start gaining experience and actually building your CV, because that always looks good. And I wouldn't say that there are some specific mechanisms that like at the same I'm telling my like students who I'm working with or people that I mentor or ask me for advice. It's consistent with the slide that I showed at the beginning. For me, it's a mindset that, like try to look for opportunities and the bigger grants will come later.
I also tried something called KL2. It's also a training grant. There's a whole series of training grant that starts with Ks. KL2 is something I'm eligible for. I believe it's an internal review process though. So I didn't get it, so I didn't mention it in my application. But any K series is eligible.
Great, thank you. I do see a question in the Q&A chat. This is from Lisbeth Dominguez. She says, thank you for all the interesting talks. Can you elaborate on how to organize a team to discuss a grant application? Would you organize this team before, during, or after writing?
I can maybe comment on this because I think it's something I mentioned also at the end of my presentation. So for me, it's very crucial to assemble this team at the very beginning before I have written a single word on a piece of paper. So I have an idea. Maybe it's just a title or 2 or 3 sentences, and then I try to get a team together. I don't usually think that people appreciate it if they get a near finished grant application, because that also limits you in kind of the amount of changes you want to propose. Because if it's already almost finished, then are they gonna completely rewrite their application? Probably not. So I would suggest to get people involved very early on. Yeah, and also if people, sometimes you want to involve people and they don't want to be involved. So don't take it personal. Yeah, just don't be afraid to ask, I would say.
Yeah, and I think sometimes to like lead on from that, like we took that approach to sort of take away the need to have like, you know, it can be scary as an early career to ask people to give you feedback and be involved. That at our institute, we have both like an annual planning day. So that's where, and again, part of that is pitching what grants you want to write in the coming year. And then the lead up to all the major schemes, we have what we call Grants Club, where people get up and they talk about their ideas. And again, that stretches all the way from that first idea just being like, hey, is this reasonable? These are the things I'm going to include, to then when you're getting closer to the deadline and actually putting up segments and having the entire institute look at it, give you feedback, you know, help in writing and stuff. And then also, you know, if it's a team grant or something like that, like, yes, you're also having individual meetings with everyone involved. But we've seen that that's been such a big change for the institute at large, because even though, say, our PhD students come along, and so, yes, they're not writing those grants yet, but they're seeing all the elements that are required, you know, to put these grants together and stuff like that. Because even sometimes we, you know, you can just talk about, the proposal, what as Martin was leading to, like there's so many other components that go into actually finalizing these applications. So exposing everyone to, you know, that whole process has been, you know, we've seen a change in our success rates. And then also, as I said, that's taken the pressure off. There's someone who's, you know, a little bit more reserved and not as outgoing. Like, you know, it's just become the standard in our group that this is what everyone does. Everyone comes from the juniors to the seniors and participates in it. But, you know, that obviously was taken, like Paul Kill and I started that. So, you know, just go to your leadership, go to your PI and be like, hey, maybe this is an idea that I want to implement in our lab. And then it can be easily embraced.
Cool, thank you. We have our next question. The question is whether there are grants where master's residents can apply for, maybe just to build their CVs for the future.
I mean, I think one thing that like we don't really have the equivalent here in Australia of like that you know, degree or whatever, but you know, it can be little things. Start with like travel grants or you know, publication grants. Like there's always like small things that just help, because yes, you're not expected to come out and already win $1 million grant or something like that, but there's always those little opportunities. And the same, I think Grace mentioned, like at the AAPM, they even have, you know, there's seed grants, travel grants, you know, RSNA, like there's, so you can look at sort of those, you know, a couple thousand, you know, here or there. And then that definitely builds and that demonstrates a track record of being able to secure funding, even at a very early career stage.
Yeah, I don't remember the requirements for APM seed grant, but I think it's fine for residents. Well, definitely for residents, but I think also for master residents, you don't need to have PhD, if I'm not mistaken. But there are also some other APM programs, right? There's this well, undergrad fellowship, there is doctoral and master's graduate fellowship. So there's a number of fellowships that you can apply for at an early career. And this is not a real like big grant, but that's exactly what we are talking about. That's a good starting point. And definitely, and it would enhance your CV, and also like will build up this whole experience. That's something that really I think like helped me, that I started early and I was just learning.
So I don't know if other institutes have this. What was really helpful in me finding all these different, foundation society grants is kind of this funding opportunity digest from some Johns Hopkins office. I think you get to daily or weekly email with all the funding opportunities. There is stuff for early investigator, for mid-career, late career. So if there is something equivalent, that's something you can look up to. You can look up. Also, there are specific foundations and societies. If you are doing cancer research, you can look up the funding opportunity for American Cancer Society. If you're doing, heart, there is American Heart Association, those kind of things.
Thank you all. Yeah, good point. Looking for these smaller grants that residents are eligible for. I think another question we had put together before this, if you could maybe talk a bit more about how collaborations with industry can help with getting industry grants and any other opportunities from the private sector. I know Martin did talk about this a bit, but I think it's important, and we don't always talk about industry grants, but there are a lot out there. So maybe if we could just elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think industry grant is not necessarily what I was referring to. So there's on the European and also on the Dutch level, there are government-funded grant schemes which require a certain industry co-funding percentage up to 50%, usually between 30 and 50%. So it's not an exclusive research relationship with the vendor, but it's a vendor or multiple vendors that support an existing project application. So that's what I have experience with, and very good experience with, to be honest. I think it's also possible to go directly to a company, but that's outside of my area of expertise.
Also in the United States, there are government, so NIH also has this code that I used for my R1 that was academic industrial collaboration. So, and actually this particular FOA, although it is under parent R1, requires to have an industrial partner because they want to see potential to transfer technology, or let's say at least bring technology to a higher readiness level. And it often requires an industrial partner. So I think that's depends on what you are doing, of course. But like since my research is really about technology, then I think it totally makes sense to involve an industrial partner that you can trust and you can build something together. I think you always have to be clear that it is still like if it's government funding, it is research, right? So you are working together on solving some bigger problems. Must be, well, probably there are some other types of funding, but at least like if it's R1, that's of course it's a long-term project that you want to develop something ambitious together. And as long as you find a great partner that is also like industrial partner that is interested in that, I think that's awesome and can really bring your research to a higher level. That said, this grant doesn't require any contribution offer, so it's a little bit different than what Martin referred to. You are just applying together, like they become your awardee, subcontract, right? So you're building a consortium, but that's it. So they are just your collaborators.
So maybe I can say a little bit about industry funding, like funding from industry. I think is really challenging for early career people to get this kind of funding. There isn't an open call where you can submit an application. I think you need to be known in the field. The industry people need to know you and know that you can produce work that they want. So I think I personally, my understanding is this kind of funding opportunity is mainly based on your existing connection, your networking. So I think if you want to collaborate more with industry, working as an early career investigator, working in a lab that has a lot of industry collaborations, make yourself known to the people in the company is a good start. And then start building your own research portfolio, prove that you are someone who can be productive, who do good work. And through kind of connections you built through the years, these kind of opportunities would eventually come, is my understanding.
That's very, very useful, very fruitful. We got one more question asking for people who have clinical responsibilities. What are your tips or suggestions for them to request time to put for writing grants? Like, how can they reach out to their institutions and ask them if they can allocate some time for research and grant writing?
That's a very good question. I don't know, maybe I'm the only one who has some clinical responsibilities. I don't know. Most likely. So maybe I can say something from my perspective. Well, although I'm not a typical clinical physicist who has patient coverage, but I work on developments. But it's true that like initially I think I only had 20% protected time that is like non-clinical time that you can use for whatever you want. So I think it depends, like whatever you want. Look, your academic, let's say, development, including research. Then it depends very much on the institution, right? Like, and where you are. If it's an academic hospital, like Mass General Hospital, of course, everyone will value research. And I think nobody will ever tell you, no, you cannot apply for grants. Then, of course, if you get a grant, like especially a bigger grant that also partially can cover your salary, typically this time that you can allocate to research extends a little bit. So I think you need to know the conditions of your employment and at least to have some initial time allocated to research, whatever it is. I think it's often about 20%. And then once you are successful, I think you can also, in most cases, expand your research activities. Definitely, if you get, 4 or 5 hour ones, probably you will be spending more time on research in the clinic, and then you might need to change your role, discuss with the department head and so on. But to start getting some funding and building your lab, I think this 20% is definitely enough. But yeah, I cannot really say like I cannot advise how to negotiate this because that depends very much on the place and your role. So in my case, I was lucky, and actually that was also the reason why I accepted the offer with these clinical duties, that I knew that I would have some protected time that I could spend on research and grant writing. So that's important. Like if you are interested in research, make sure that you will have some time to do it. Yeah, that's more of my advice.
So I know the time is kind of ending. We have a question that is somehow related to this one. So if someone can just comment on it quickly, and it's more for medical physics residents who plan to get the grant for post-residency faculty phase during the residency time.
Well, I think it's kind of related to what Conrad said. If you really want to pursue this path, plan your faculty position carefully, find an institution that's supportive of you applying for grants, and when you're negotiating, make sure you reserve a certain amount of time that you can actually have the time to write grants and do research.
Cool. Lauren, would you like to close?
Yeah, so I'd like to thank all of you so much for your time. Really fantastic talks. I think there was a lot of common themes, but you all had some unique perspectives to share on grant writing. So I think this was really excellent. Thank you all for your time, and thank you to the audience. And again, please feel free to reach out if you want to know more about the Global Early Career Research Subcommittee. Have a great rest of your day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Recordings